Hello, welcome back. This is Amber Rain Davis from NotableInk.com. This card is part of a set that I did for STAMPtember. Today we'll be doing Rainbow Distress Oxide stamping. I'm continuing my love of the rainbow with this card, so I hope you enjoy it as well. Today we're going to be using Simon Says Stamps Spiritual Sentiments and Big Perfect Shapes stamp set. We're also going to be using Ranger's Distress Oxide inks, and I'll have the colors listed below. Let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to start off with an A2 size card panel. This is Nina Classic Crest Solar White in 80-pound cardstock. And I'm just going to divide this in quarters, and then I'm going to divide that on the diagonal, each one of those sections as well. We're going to use this as guidelines in order to stamp what looks like a flower in the background. We'll be using a heart-shaped stamp because I felt like that went really well with the sentiment from Simon for STAMPtember. The sentiment is love never fails. I find it easier to use a regular stamp block when doing a design like this, and so what I will do is put the stamp either on my guidelines or on my craft mat there, and I'll line the grid lines on the stamp block up with the stamp itself to make sure everything is centered. And then when I go ahead and start my stamping, I'm going to line up the stamp grid lines with the guideline that I've left myself. You can see that I've erased some of those guidelines so that there's less erasing to do once I have the ink on the paper. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in the card. So I'm just getting those guidelines on the block lined up with the guidelines on the card panel. You can see it left a little white spot there, and I'm showing you that on the stamp there. It looks like there was maybe like a small defect or a bubble in the stamp there. I think next time I use the stamp set, I'll just flip it over and use the back side of the heart. It should work perfectly well because it's a symmetrical stamp, so that shouldn't be an issue. So by overlapping the colors and the hearts when you're doing this stamping, it gives you a nice color variation. But the nice thing about the Distress Oxides is that they are opaque, and so they can stamp right on top of each other, and it's not the same as your regular Distress inks or dye inks where they're transparent. So it does give you an interesting effect. So I'm going to go around in the circle. This is Twisted Citron, one of my favorite colors. And we'll continue stamping around in that circle. When we get to the blue, this particular card is stamped with Mermaid Lagoon. You're going to see another version of this card later on. This particular section of the card I forgot to hit record, so I had to go back at a later date and record this part because, let's be honest, this is pretty much the whole part of the card right here. So I think the first time around when I did this, I actually used Salty Ocean, and I do think I preferred the Salty Ocean over the Mermaid Lagoon, so maybe keep that in mind when you're doing your own stamping if you decide to do this card or a similar card like this. So again, overlapping those, and you can see that I have some blotchy areas. That's actually going to be covered up by the next stamp, so I'm just trucking along here. I'm not going to stop and try and fix that at this point. There will be a point in this video where I show you how to fill in some of those areas if you do have some missing spots. So we're going to do the last stamp with Picked Raspberry. Be sure to clean your stamp in between. And you can just see how nice and juicy those stamp pads are. The Distress Oxides are great for stamping. The Distress inks don't stamp as well. So there we are. So you can see there's a couple of those little white dots there. And I'm just going to use this little micro applicator. I'm going to dip it straight onto the ink pad and pick that up. If you have a larger area, you can actually use your finger to put more ink on there. And once that's done, I'm going to go ahead and erase those guidelines. So pretty simple to erase those just off of the regular cardstock, but Once I start erasing the inked areas, the paper starts to pill just a little bit. Really important to make sure that your inks are dry before you start erasing. So you can see it starts to pill up a little here, and I give it the thumbs down, but I still can't help myself. I don't stop. I just keep going because I just can't help myself. So don't do what I do. Take a moment, let it dry, go step away, do something else, or even heat set it. And that should really help to dry the ink so that you don't get that pilling that's happening because the cardstock is wet. So I am going to take my own advice and heat set it a little bit before I go ahead and stamp it, because I want to I want to stamp in black and clear heat emboss it. And you know, if that ink is wet, all of your embossing powder is going to stick to all of that. So go ahead, heat dry it, and then we can stamp. So it's dry. I'm going to go ahead and use my anti-static bag to make double sure that my embossing powder isn't going to stick to the stamping. I'm going to use VersaFine Onyx Black ink to stamp it, which is amazing for sentiments. I love this ink. It's amazing. I absolutely have to clear heat emboss it though, otherwise I will smudge that business all over the place. So here we go. We're putting on the embossing powder, and it is a miracle that none of it is sticking to the paper. Look at that. Amazing. So we'll go ahead and heat set that, and then we'll figure out the rest of our card design. So I felt like it needed a little something extra. And so I have Lawn Fawn's Really Rainbow Petite paper pack here. I believe I got this as part of one of the Simon Says Stamp card kits. And so I'm just flipping through the paper pad to see which design I like best. I knew I wanted a rainbow, but I wanted to figure out which one did I like best. So I flipped through a few. You get to see that here. You can see that I'm super indecisive. That seems a little too busy to me. And this one seems perfect. It's amazing to me how well those color stripes matched the ink, right? Amazing. It's like they were made for each other. So I'm going to go ahead and trim down the card panel by, I think that's 1/8 of an inch on either side. And you've got a nice little border. I'm going to pop that up on some sticky back fun foam. I would tend to add another pop of color with the fun foam, so I'll grab a coordinating color. I'll just trim it down to size with scissors. Sometimes I'll use my paper trimmer. We'll get that stuck on there, and sometimes I will do liquid glue on the back of that. Other times I'll use the score tape. I just had a stray bit of clear embossing powder right there, like a little, I don't know if it was just like a little stray bit of ink or what happened there, but you can see I'm just touching that up with the Twisted Citron. For whatever reason, I decided to show you guys how I decided on my colors. I swatched them out with some ink daubers to pick my colors. And so we're just going to get this adhered to the paper pack, and then we'll put it on a card base, and this card will be done. So that adhesive is super sticky, so you better make sure when you're putting it down that you've got it in the right place, because you're not getting it back off once it's on there. And I usually will just kind of run my bone folder across the back to make sure it's getting adhered. Here I was playing around with, do I want any other embellishments? So I tried some Nuvo drops that I had already kind of pre-dried on my craft mat, and here I'm trying some clear flat sequins from Pretty Pink Posh, and I didn't really like any embellishments, so this card was left without it. I feel like it's got enough with all the rainbow and with the border. So we'll get that adhered to the card base, and this card will be done. There we go. Here's the finished card. I hope you enjoyed this card today. If you did, please subscribe to my YouTube channel below and to my blog at notableink.com. Be sure to check out Simon Says Stamp site so that you can see all of the different blogs participating. This isn't a blog hop, but a celebration, and on each person's blog, what you'll see is a random promotion by Simon Says Stamps. So it'll be fun to play along and see who has what. Be sure to come back and visit my blog to see the rest of the cards. Thanks so much for stopping by and have a great day.